I wasn't going to wear my hat, but I might have to. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Like Brenda said, my name's Krystal Glass. That is my real name. And I'm from Hurricane, Utah. I actually grew up in Hurricane, Utah, so it's an honor to work at my local public lands and tell y'all about them. I started my career in Zion National Park, so I have 5 seasons at Zion. Very, very different from the Parashant. I've also worked at Cedar Breaks National Monument, Pipe Spring National Monument, and the job before this one was Natural Bridges National Monument. They're a sister park to Hovenweep, so I also know Hovenweep very well. And I've been here at Parashant for about a year, last January, and it's a big, big park. It is 1.4 million acres of both Bureau of Land Management and National Park Service lands. Thank you. That seems better. So even though I've been there a year, there's still plenty of things I don't know and plenty of roads I have not been on. The Arizona Strip as a whole, which is kind of the section of northern Arizona from the north rim of the Grand Canyon up to the border of Utah. I lovingly call it Baja, Utah. Sorry, Arizonans. But there's over 6,000 miles of unpaved dirt road in the Arizona Strip. And on the monument itself, there's over 4,000 miles. So you could spend your whole life out here and not see everything. So this is kind of just an overview of our park. I work for the National Park Service, but we also have Bureau of Land Management lands. And we're one of only 2 national monuments in the entire country that are administered by those 2 specific agencies. So it's a pretty special place. Slide, please. Now, I did not realize this would come out so squished, but I have resources up at the front if you'd like your very own map. So we are, Mesquite is right there. And within the green borders, again, it's pretty squished, but that is our monument. It goes all the way out to the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Our furthest point south is Kelly Point. In a regular truck, it can take you over 8 hours one way to get there, so it's pretty incredible. And I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of some of our greatest hits. But why is Parashant so special, so wild? Why does it have such unique spots, kind of like Brenda said? Well, it all goes back to what it's made of. Go ahead. But first, before we get into why Parashant is Parashant, I think this is a good group to ask this question. What unique experiences draw you to remote locations? Like I said, I worked in Zion National Park. It is a very different experience than being out at Gold Butte or out at Parashant. Does anyone feel comfortable to speak about what draws them to remote locations?
Yeah, lack of crowds.
Lack of crowds, that's like number 1, right? Not having to fight your way on your trail or Photoshop people out of your picture. Anyone else?
The land is still the way it's always been. It hasn't been modified and changed.
Absolutely. Even in Zion is a national park, but it's very manicured and it's very what we call front country. So the lands are not the way they were untouched before settlers or even indigenous people, right? So anyone else?
You can go to the rim.
You can go all the way to the rim, absolutely. Growing up in the area, I've been to the South Rim, I've been to the North Rim proper, and there is still nothing like seeing the Grand Canyon from some of these spots. Everyone, maybe not you guys, but a lot of people across the country and the world have that very emotional, raw experience with the Grand Canyon. I grew up near it. I never had that experience where I stood at the rim and was crying. But the first time I went to Whitmore Point, which you'll see, I definitely had that experience. So, anyone else want to share? Okay, awesome. Go ahead. So what makes Parashant Parashant? Well, part of that is we have 4 different floristic provinces. Those are some big words that don't really matter. But what matters is about it is 4 different regions characterized by very specific plant life, and they have very different climates. So this picture right here is Mount Logan Overlook. Our highest elevation I think is 8,000 feet above sea level, so pretty high. And then we've got Whitmore Canyon overlook. So Mount Logan's going to be like Colorado Plateau, higher elevation type stuff. All the way down in Whitmore Canyon, we have Ocotillo, which is like Sonoran Desert. Really shouldn't even be in this corner of Arizona. Up here, we've got the Pacoon Basin. We've got pretty dense Joshua Tree forest there. In the Pacoon Basin, we actually have about 50% of the volume of Joshua trees found in Joshua Tree National Park. So that is going to be the Mojave Desert. And then over there, that's Wolf Hole Valley. You can find that off of Main Street. So if you go up to St. George, Utah, down River Road and just follow the signs to Arizona, in a 4x4 truck only, please. But you'll find your way to that valley. And in the summer and fall, it's really, really pretty. That's your basin and range. So we'll talk a lot about those. Next slide, please. So those 4 floristic provinces that make all the different corners of Parashant so unique are the way they are because of where we are geographically and what happened to us geologically. So we're kind of in this corner, not all the way up to the border. I didn't realize when I picked this map, that is the shape of our monument. Perfect. We're right on the edge of the Colorado Plateau. And then we also have some of the Great Basin, or the Basin and Range. The Colorado Plateau, it uplifted in a really interesting way. It kind of uplifted like an elevator. So before I get into this, is everyone familiar with plate tectonics?
Yes.
Great, awesome. Sometimes I forget to front load some information that some people might not know. I'm glad we're familiar with that. But because of plates moving under the Earth's crust, there was a huge uplift of this area. But it uplifted like an elevator. So you definitely can find some weird slants and stuff all across the Colorado Plateau. But for the most part, it kind of just rose up out of the ground, and all of those sedimentary layers are pretty well intact all across it. And that's what makes it super unique. And then when we talk about basin and range, that is plates pulling away from each other under the Earth's crust. And it's one of my favorite geologic things to talk about. It's crustal extension. So as those plates pull away from each other, the crust starts to thin, and both those different geologic areas really play a part in the landscape. So now we'll get to the pretty pictures. This again is Mount Logan. It's kind of hazy, and you'll find that some of the pictures I have today are not the best resolution. I apologize. But that is just so vast. That is a great example of Colorado Plateau, or what we call canyon country. Because that plateau just uplifted so nice and even for us, it then started eroding away all these beautiful canyons. Like the Grand Canyon is the biggest example, but up in Canyonlands, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different canyons to explore. So Mount Logan, this is called Hell's Hole. Mount Logan Overlook, if you kind of go off the edge, pretty much, this is what you'll see. It's kind of like Cedar Breaks National Monument. It doesn't have quite the same structure, so we don't get any hoodoos or arches like you would at Cedar Breaks, but this is a great example of that erosion. It's just pulling away from the very edges of the Colorado Plateau. And this is my favorite picture to exemplify the Colorado Plateau. This is Kelly Point. Again, it's that southernmost point. For us, it usually takes, about 8 hours to get out there. We go all the way to Mount Dellenbaugh, which you can find on a map later. We usually camp for a night, and then it takes us 4 hours in an ATV to go 26 miles. So that tells you how rough the road is, that last little bit. But the view is well worth it. You've got all these snaking side canyons going out to the main part of the Grand Canyon there. It's gorgeous. So that is Colorado Plateau. And then I have some examples of basin and range. First I thought this was a wonderful example. So this would be like the edge of the Colorado Plateau, and it's stretching out. Has anyone ever driven straight west into Nevada? Well, I guess we're really south. But from where I'm at, up in Hurricane, if you just drive straight out there, it's just up and down and up and down. My senior trip I actually did alone after high school, and I drove all the way out the loneliest highway in kind of north central Nevada and came back on the extraterrestrial highway. After about the third one, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much of it. So you guys as Nevadans or maybe Arizonans are probably pretty familiar with this, but I really liked how it showed kind of the deposition that comes off of the basin and range as it's extending. And now we get into some of the examples. This is actually the first place I was lucky enough to go on Parashant. This is Hudson Overlook or Hudson Point. Pretty easy to get to actually, except the last about quarter mile. It's pretty much how every road on Parashant is going to be. It's good until the last quarter mile, except for Limekiln and Elbow. Those aren't quite on the monument though, I don't think. But here is great because we're standing up on the top of the Colorado Plateau. We've got this middle bench here. It's literally called Middle Bench. And then you can see it extending all the way out. This is not the best view, but if you're, well, it's a beautiful view. But if you go there in person and you look around, you'll be able to see these big square blocks of sedimentary rock literally crumbling away. And so you can see in real time the valley pulling away from the Colorado Plateau. So this again is Whitmore Canyon, looking upstream. This is my favorite place to go see the Grand Canyon in our park. You actually, when you drive out to Whitmore Canyon, you'll kind of sink into the canyon itself, which is very unique. Kelly Point, Twin Point, a lot of those other places are up high on the rim. This road will actually take you kind of into a side canyon, and I think it's only about a mile, a very steep mile, to hike down to the river. But the other reason I wanted to bring this picture up, can anyone tell me some of the things they're seeing in this photo?
Ocotillo.
Ocotillo? How about geology-wise? Different kinds of rocks, maybe? Lava. So we've got volcanic activity. So that also comes from the crustal extension of the basin and range. As that pulled apart, as far back as 10,000 years ago and as recently as 1,100 years ago, we've had volcanic eruptions and volcanic activity all through, much of Utah, much of northern Arizona, really. And as you can kind of see here, in the middle there, some of this volcanic activity actually once blocked or dammed the Colorado River. So very unique place to go see. And the reason I bring up volcanic activity is because we don't just have beautiful views at Parashant. We also have over 12,000 years of evidence of human life. So this is the Uinkaret volcanic field. It is a very, very important culturally and spiritually to the Southern Paiute people. If you ever go out there, we actually ask that you don't walk on the lava field. There's some places you have to walk and drive on it to get access, but for the most part, we don't want you traipsing across it because it is so important. And it's one of the youngest volcanic fields in the area. So again, closest to that 1,100 years ago time period. The reason I wanted to show you these aerial photos is because the next photo, this is a lithograph of a sketch done by John Wesley Powell's Geologic Survey team in the 1870s. So a different view, obviously, but the same volcanic field is being recorded here. So it's one of my favorite historic resources to pull out. Go ahead. And that takes us to the cultural site that's open to the public on the Uinkaret volcanic field. That's Nampaweep. So Nampaweep is a place where you can see different petroglyphs. There actually is a calendar marker there, so that one over there. In the fall and the spring solstice, or equinox rather, you can go there at a specific time of day, and the shadow of a rock will cut that spiral exactly in half. So if you're not familiar with petroglyphs, they often do have a lot more meaning than a lot of us recognize on the surface. I'm not an archaeologist. I take what all the scientists say and digest it and make it approachable for the general public, so I don't have all the information. But I was very fortunate to experience this year. That was actually my photo that I got to take. The Southern Paiute people have been in the area since time immemorial. They're thought to be descendants of the ancestral Puebloan people. So go ahead. Oh, another beautiful picture of Nampaweep. Nampaweep, I can't remember the exact translation, but I think it's Bigfoot Canyon. And here, obviously, the bighorn sheep is the kind of focal point. But on the rocks behind here, we also have some large feet that are pecked into the rock. So that's kind of where that name comes from. And it's beautiful at night, obviously. So this is the traditional Southern Paiute homelands. So again, a little more recent time period. We'll get into the ancestral Puebloans, I think, in the next slide. But we have over 13 associated tribes with Grand Canyon-Parashant. Many of those are part of the Southern Paiute bands. So Kaibab, Shivwits, Uwinkarit really isn't its own anymore. Many of these bands actually kind of dissolved into the bands we know today after a European-American settlement. So we're not going to find all of these today, but Pahrump, Las Vegas, Chemehuevi, Navajo, Hopi, Zuni Pueblo is also associated with the Grand Canyon-Parashant. So it's a place that's important to a lot of people, and they have ancestors going back, again, over 12,000 years is what we think for human activity in the area. So, oh, this is really fuzzy. So this is the ancestral Puebloans, which would have been before or the ancestors of Southern Paiute people. So this is Arizona. I think this is supposed to be Lake Mead. I know it's really hard to kind of tell. So we have both ancestral Puebloans in here for a time period, and we also have the Fremont people, which I think a really good example is Fremont State Park up towards Beaver in Utah. That has some great examples of Fremont. For a long time in my career, again, I'm not an archaeologist, it was hard for me to kind of tell the differences, but that gave me a great overview of some of the differences in culture up there. Next slide. And so this little rock is called olivine. I did bring some with me. I don't know where I put it. I can show it to you after if you're super interested. I did bring some. But olivine kind of brings us back to that lava flow. Olivine is a crystal. It's kind of related to peridot, and it cools at high temperatures, so it cools slowly, creating bigger crystals. It comes from lava or basalt. And olivine was actually used to temper pottery. When I say temper, I mean it was ground up and put into clay to make it harder. And as I talk about the ancestral Puebloans, we know that they had trade routes all the way from Mount Trumbull, probably further, but as far as olivine goes, it's on Mount Trumbull. And all the way down to the Muddy River in Moapa, we find that olivine in pottery. And Mount Trumbull is the only place, at least in the local area, where you can find olivine. So we know that this landscape has been connected for thousands and thousands of years. And pottery has both, olivine came down here to make pottery, but then the pottery also went back up into Grand Canyon-Parashant. So we know there was a significant trade network prior to the Southern Paiute people even. And just another clip of the map to kind of show you. So again, Lake Mead is down here. So Moapa's got to be over here somewhere. And then Mount Trumbull is all the way over here. Again, this map is really squishy, and as the crow flies, I'm not sure how far that is, but it's not close. I can tell you from St. George in a 4x4 truck, it takes me 2 hours almost to get to Mount Trumbull. So it is not a close distance. And that kind of brings us to the question, how did they do it? I mean, obviously on foot, maybe later on horseback, but a lot of that is desert. So any idea what they would need to get across that landscape? Water, absolutely, kind of a trick question. Of course they would need water. There's lots of springs up near Mount Trumbull. We can see some little creeks and stuff across the map here. But springs are actually almost equidistant across the monument. So there's a couple over at Mount Trumbull. There's a couple here in the Poverty Mountain area. And then we've got Pigeon Spring down by the Grand Gulch Mine. We've got Tassai and Pacoon Springs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So these very important springs are almost all equidistant across the monument. And that takes us back to the Colorado Plateau and Krystal Extension. When the Colorado Plateau uplifted, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years prior to that uplift, faults opened up and broke apart. And in researching this, I actually read a really good metaphor. A fault in the earth is like a cut on your knuckle. It can heal up, but just a little bit of stress is going to rip it back open, right? So that's what's happening to these springs across the monument even today. They're all little faults that existed before the Colorado Plateau. And as the Colorado Plateau uplifted and the basin and range has started to extend and pull away, these faults are basically unzipping across the fault line. In fact, Tassai Ranch, I went there the other day. I locked the keys in the truck out there, which was not good. I'm back, obviously. But we're having to do a lot of conservation work at Tassai Ranch because there's a travertine spring there, and limestone and gypsum, and it's all like melting away. And also there's a lot of movement along the fault where the spring is, and it's moved so much that it's actually flooding the historic ranch house. So we're doing our best to conserve that, but even today, we can see those geologic impacts. I feel like I'm just slamming through this program really quickly. So water. Water is what got people from Mount Trumbull down here to the Muddy River and potentially even down to Lake Mead. Well before it was a lake, of course. And here's some pictures of the springs. The Tassai Spring is really overgrown. I did not have a lot of great pictures of that, especially because it's shifted so much. But these are Pacoon. And Pacoon is actually quite easy for most people to get to. If you go out on the Gold Butte Road, go to Whitney Pockets, and then you'll go over Aravada, the ranch there, the private inholding. The road right now is great. It's not always great, but it's beautiful right now. And you can get to Pacoon really quickly. Again, you'll go through that really cool Joshua Tree Forest and tortoise habitat, and then you come to this spring. Now I could not get a number out of my boss, and I could not find a water report in time, but this spring is pretty steady. It's putting out about 35 to 45 gallons of water per minute. Again, in the middle of the desert. So that's pretty significant.
Is it a hot spring or?
It's not. We do have some, I wouldn't call them like true geothermal hot springs, but we do have some warm springs on the monument. In fact, Tassai Ranch is always lukewarm 72 degrees. Pacoon is not. Pacoon is much colder. But thank you for bringing that up, because those warmer springs are actually a great home for the endemic spring snail that we have. Now, I worked at Zion. You may or may not know this. I think every place with a specific spring ecosystem ends up having their own endemic spring snail. Zion has one too. Other places have them. But yes, we have one that only lives in those specific springs on the Parashant. Oh, this one's blurry too. So, water is life. Water brings life. Water allowed indigenous people to go all the way across the desert and much, much further than even evidence suggests, probably. But it also brought people to the area later. This photograph is not great, but this is representative of the Dominguez and Escalante route. So the beginnings of the Old Spanish Trail, when they came up to try and find their way to San Francisco? San Bernardino, sorry. Thank you. I barely touched on this. I used to interpret it a lot more, and I brought some Old Spanish Trail unigrids, and they hardly even talk about Dominguez at Escalante. It's all about Armijo, which really surprised me. But that was in 1776, and they did come across Parashant just a little bit, just south of Pipe Spring National Monument. Now, I can't say they really relied on the springs very much, but their horses definitely depended on the foliage that the springs supported. So, important part of Dominguez and Escalante Trail. There is a translation of the Dominguez and Escalante journals by Angelica Chavez. That's my favorite one personally. Oh, I forgot that was there. And the reason I like that one is it talks so much about how reliant Dominguez and Escalante were on the Southern Paiute peoples they encountered along the way. There's a very significant section of the journals that's just like, okay, we found a Southern Paiute person, they told us where this trail is, okay, we've reached the end of that trail and now we don't know what to do. Let's go find another Southern Paiute person. So that knowledge of the land was really integral to, of course, Dominguez and Escalante, and later other explorers like Armijo. And this is the Dominguez Escalante route. Again, not great. Parashant is kind of over here. So they just barely touched the corner of it, and then went up into central Utah. And that brings us to another person that kind of explored a little bit of the monument. Does anybody know who this is, just by looking at him?
Is that Jacob?
It is Jacob. Good job, Arjeen. I'm so glad to be in a Nevada crowd. It's a little bit different from other places I interpret. So, but yes, this is Jacob Hamblin.
What's his name? Jacob Hamlin.
Yes, Jacob Hamblin. So, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was actually out here. Powell didn't come till his 70s, so a couple years before John Wesley Powell, and he went across the Shibwoods Plateau in 1858. This is kind of the route he took, this dotted line here. Again, he went by Pipe Spring, and he didn't quite come onto the monument, but it is said that he spent time over here in the Shibwoods Plateau, more on this area. Now, there's a couple different reasons for this. Some say he was sent by Brigham Young on a proselyting mission to the Southern Paiute people in the area, and that was definitely true. There are also some writings about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Has anybody heard of that?
Yes.
Quite a lot of us, right? So I can't confirm or deny that this happened, but after the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where men and women were killed by members of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and potentially some Southern Paiute involvement, there were, I believe it was 17 children whose lives were spared, and they were said to have gone missing. So Brigham Young also gave Jacob Hamlin some money to go out to the Shibwoods Plateau and some of these other areas and try to find these children. Now, the reason I'm kind of dancing around this subject a little bit is because some writings say that those children were in the care of Jacob Hamlin's wife and other members of the community the entire time he was out on the Shibwoods Plateau. So there's a lot of hot debate about that. If you want to get into it more, we can talk about it after. But it is what it is. He did contribute to the area by traveling through it and recording what he saw and found. So next slide, please. This is one of my favorite pictures. As I've been kind of mentioning, John Wesley Powell did his trip down the Colorado River. I believe it started in 1869 and then went into the 1870s. He visited Pipe Spring, and he did come onto the Parashant a little bit. Now, this location, this picture, is from the U.S. Geological Survey again during that time. This was taken a little bit later, I think, 1890s is what it said in the National Archives. But this is Tuweep Overlook. Is anyone familiar with that? Some of us? Yeah, so that's not quite on Parashant. That's just to the east. But you have to drive through Parashant to get there, and we have a very close relationship with them. And if we go to the next slide, this is actually me there last January for the first time. As we can see in the next picture, that is pretty much the exact same spot that they were in 1870. So, and of course, Indigenous people have probably been there for much, 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 much longer. But it kind of made me feel special when I put this slideshow together today and saw that side by side. So you too have an opportunity to visit Tuweep. There is a new permit system in place, so if you have any questions about that, let me know. But unless it's a holiday, it's pretty easy to get the permit. So And then we have more prolific use of the Arizona Strip. So we have cattle ranching going on well before the 1870s, but this is really when it started to kick off. So sheep and cattle ranching, lots of it done by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and something at the time that was called the United Order, where they kind of took all the resources of the community and put them together. So Pipe Spring is a great example of that, a tithing ranch. So people gave their cattle to the church as tithing, and then it was all distributed back to the community and taken care of on the Arizona Strip. And then the sawmill. So is anyone familiar with the St. George Temple? Some of us, we know it exists, right? And we know it's one of the oldest temples in Utah, perhaps. So the lumber, I couldn't think of what that word was, the lumber, the timber for the original St. George Temple came off of Mount Trumbull. Sometimes you'll see it as the Nixon sawmill site, sometimes you'll see it as the Blake sawmill site. But it ran from about 1870 into 1919, and its best years were from 1875 to 1876. St. George Temple was completed in 1877. So if you're familiar with the Temple Trail, or maybe you're not, I have some pamphlets up front, but you can still walk or ride the Temple Trail today, and it was a long, tough trek back to St. George. I personally would not want to drag giant ponderosa trees that far. But having a sawmill up there on Mount Trumbull made it a lot easier to transport some of the lumber. Next picture. Yeah, so this is again a picture of that sawmill. And you can still go up and see the site today. There's a little plaque there, and you can see kind of where the foundations of this building would have been. There's also an archaeology site close by. So again, not only using the same pathways and trails that indigenous peoples have used for thousands of years, but the very same flat, good locations to inhabit have been built upon time and time again all across the Arizona Strip. So. And then we also have mining. Mining also started as early as the 1850s, but really didn't get going until the 1870s. This is a picture of the Grand Gulch Mine. That one was tough to get to for me, for my first experience out there. For the most part, it's pretty good. And then you drop into this tiny canyon called Pigeon Canyon. And every time you go off a slick rock shelf, you're worried you're going to hit the back of the truck. So it is pretty rutted out, but it's a beautiful place. I think they pulled copper and silver out of this location. They pulled 24,000 ounces of silver out of Grand Gulch Mine between 1872 and 1919. And it's also said to be probably one of the richest and most pure mines for copper in all of Arizona. The ore itself has very few impurities compared to a lot of other mines in the area. And they pulled out over 6.6 million pounds. I don't know why that was recorded in pounds and not tons, but still quite a bit of material. 6.6 million pounds of copper out of this location. I think I have another picture. So this is kind of hard to see. Someone was being very artsy when they took this picture. We've got the Milky Way up there, which is just gorgeous. And then we've got these old mining trucks. I think these are definitely probably post-1919. But before mining trucks, they had mules, like 16 mules to pull all this ore out of it. And what they would do is they would go from the Grand Gulch Mine actually over to Lake Mead. It was easier to take it down that way than back up towards St. George. So if you've ever been on one of those roads, even if you've been on the Gold Butte Road that's kind of partially paved, I would not want to be dragging copper out of these places. To me, that's just insane. So copper, and then ranching was the other big one. It really started with sheep, I'm from Utah, and a lot of Utah ranching started with sheep as well. So at first there weren't a ton of fences because sheep were being herded. And then later, especially as barbed wire is invented and we start shipping cattle by train and not necessarily driving them across the country, we get more and more and more cattle ranching on the Arizona Strip. There's still cattle ranchers out there today. I think the Bundys have a restaurant in St. George where they sell steaks cut from their cattle, and you can buy their beef as well. So this is a picture from Arizona BLM. I think that's over by Diamond Butte, which again is off the Main Street Valley area south of River Road in St. George. And this brings us back to Tassai Ranch. Tassai Ranch was, there's evidence of indigenous agriculture there. So both Southern Paiute peoples and ancestral Puebloans did farm the land, corn, beans, and squash. The Three Sisters, very important agricultural staples for those people. But as early as 1870, we see European Americans farming this area. And officially in 1920, Ed Yates got the claim to Tassai Ranch. Now, hopefully you guys are familiar with water rights in the West. There are a lot of people who claimed to own different ranches and springs that never really had the water rights. So that's very fun history to dig into as well on the Arizona Strip. But this is the ranch house here. There's a shed. The spring kind of comes down behind. As you can see, it's like this lush oasis in the middle of Mojave Desert. And Tassai Spring, it's moving a lot, so the output changes. But I think the highest volume is around 90 gallons per minute. So that is a lot of water. And again, another very important location for indigenous people and for ranchers later on. This is Waring Ranch. Slim Waring is one of the many myths and legends of the Arizona Strip. Lots of cool stories about Slim Waring. And this is, again, another very southern location on the monument. So if you're going up to Kelly Point, that furthest south location, this is going to be one of your last stops. You're going to drive right through Waring Ranch before the road gets really, really, really crummy. So in 1916, he was living out there with just a couple people. I think that would be really, really hard. Let's see kind of what time it is here. Oh, we're on track, sweet. So in 1964, we jump all the way from 1920s to 1964, Lake Mead National Recreation Area was established. Have any of you been far out on the Gold Butte Road? After it turns to a couple of us? Awesome. So if you keep going down that road, it turns to dirt. And eventually, I don't think the sign is there anymore, but there used to be a sign to Fisherman's Cove, which used to be a really popular place to fish back when Lake Mead had water. Absolutely. So this is actually from that location, and you can see the lake in the background here. Is that from? I was told it was from that location, but now I'm seeing striping on the road, and I don't think that's right. So I'll have to get after my boss for that one. But anyway, Lake Mead National Recreation Area was established in 1964, and that also encompassed Grand Canyon-Parashant lands. So before we became Parashant National Monument, we were protected under Lake Mead, which today, Lake Mead has about 1.4 million acres of land and 1.4 million acres of water, which is already a huge park. And so if you add another 1.4 million acres or so on top of it, which is Parashant, that is a huge area to manage. So next photo. And so in 2000, January 11th, 2000, Bill Clinton was convinced by Bruce Babbitt, who really loved the Parashant and the Arizona Strip as a whole, to create a national monument. We were created a national monument in the same year as Vermilion Cliffs, where the wave is. We were created in January, and Vermilion was created in November. So, and they did the signing on the South Rim, which, as a North Rim girl, is always like a slight. But they did a lot of big events down there. That's why the picture doesn't look like us at all. So establishment of the monument came, and that's kind of what we get into today, modern recreation. People have been exploring out there for hundreds of years when they were ranching and traveling across the area. I don't doubt they were taking fun hikes and swims and exploring all these places. But now we kind of get into how are people using the land out there today. So science and research, like I said at the beginning of this program, we are co-managed between the Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service. And both of those agencies do a lot of science to kind of back up our existence. We've got to put the data where our mouth is, right? So this is some bat surveys that they've done in the past with the National Park Service. Because we have Bureau of Land Management lands, we've got hunting and grazing opportunities. Neither of these pictures are on the monument. The mule deer out there, the pictures I could find, and the cattle I could find were pretty skinny, because in recent years there hasn't been a ton of resources, especially as we get drier and drier. So these are not from the monument. And something I actually learned today, you can actually hunt on the Park Service lands in the park as well. And they are some very, very coveted Arizona strip tags, and just in general. It's really hard to get some of those buck tags. So we also have camping, backcountry camping, obviously scenic drives, UTVs, ATVs, OHVs, and we also still have traditional tribal uses today. Every year we try to put on something called Y Camp, and that's where we invite Southern Paiute youth to come spend the weekend on their traditional homelands, learning from their own elders how the land was traditionally used. So lots of different uses for the Parashant. And one of my favorite things to do out there is view the night sky. As Las Vegas gets bigger and as St. George gets bigger even, we're kind of losing the dark skies that I grew up with more and more. Parashant, you'll definitely find some sky glow, but a lot of places are super, super dark. And this is out at Waring Ranch again. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. So I have one more slide, I think. So after learning about all that from millions of years ago to today, in a landscape shaped by both nature and people, what role do you play in the future? And you don't need to answer that, but I'd love for you to sit with it and think about it. Knowing about Friends of Gold Butte and what was the other nonprofit?
Virgin River Coalition.
Virgin River Coalition. I was not familiar with them until right now, so I'm going to go home and do some research. But knowing of these nonprofits and what they're offering to you as a community, I think you guys are already a step ahead in this question. But as our communities continue to grow as well, what things can we do to make sure these remote places stay connected, right? Well, thank you. That was, I feel like I was just blabbering on, but if anybody has any questions or you want to talk after, definitely come see me or, yeah, go ahead.
So what was the reasoning behind the dual management?
So, reasoning behind the dual management, there is no way, just frankly no way, they would have made a national park that big. There's some huge national parks up in Alaska, but the land was already being utilized for those multi-uses that are not traditionally done on national park lands. Also, Lake Mead, it wasn't the first national recreation area of its kind, which also has different rules than like your traditional national park. So really it was to preserve the different opportunities and the way we manage the land. Because if we manage the lands today with a purely Park Service perspective, people would not have grazing leases and mining leases and other opportunities on Parashant.
Couple of questions. What's the origin of the word Parashant?
That's a great question. I was going to talk about that, and I zoomed right past it. So Parashant is thought to be a Southern Paiute word. There is some mention of it possibly being a Southern Paiute family name from the Oak Grove area of the monument. But more officially, it comes from a Southern Paiute word that means elk hide softening water. So a solution that they would use to soften or tan or preserve elk hides. So did you have some other questions too?
Yeah, I've been curious about where the name lime kiln originated.
I do not know the formal answer. I'm not super familiar with lime kiln. However, I do know from my time at Pipe Spring and other places, people made their own lime kilns to make mortar for buildings in the area. I have no idea if that's connected, but that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, as you go up the road to lime kiln, you would expect if they were burning things to
To see evidence of
do
that. Yeah.
that there would be no trees, you'd have a bunch of tree stumps.
I have no idea, unfortunately. But anything else?
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
How much private land is inside the park itself?
I should have looked that up. I don't know the specific answer, but quite a few. We have quite a few private in holdings today. So, go ahead.
Do you do any road maintenance in this park?
So, that is a great question. Officially, no. The Arizona Strip District, which is, I don't work for them, I work for the Park Service, but our BLM staff, they fall under the Arizona Strip District. We used to be a lot more enmeshed, like Park Service supervised BLM and BLM supervised Park Service. A couple of years ago, the federal government really pulled that apart. So we're a little more kind of parallel rather than the integration that we would have liked. And because of that, so the official answer on Park Service lands is no, we do not do any road maintenance. But up on the BLM portion, the northern, well, the majority of the monument, they have one road grader, and the one road grader is shared between the Arizona Strip, Parashant, part of the Arizona Strip, and Vermilion National Monument. Wow. So, yes, but we have one guy and one machine, and again, over 6,000 miles of unpaved road. So we actually did just have a management meeting about how we can prioritize Clark's time to get the best results, and Parashant did whine a little bit about how we do not have a high priority on that list. House Rock Valley, to get to the wave, generally gets the highest priority for the road grader. That was maybe more than you wanted to hear, but awesome.
That was going to be my question. So the wave is part of the Parashant?
No, that's part of Vermilion Cliffs.
Okay.
But so there's BLM lands that are just the Arizona Strip District, Bureau of Land Management. Part of Parashant falls under the management of Arizona Strip. And then Vermilion Cliffs National Monument, they also fall under Arizona Strip. So they have kind of a tiered structure. And then the Park Service is this little overhang on the end. Any other questions for the group? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me this evening. I'll stick around for a couple minutes if you have any other private questions. And I really, really appreciate your time. I hope I didn't talk too fast, and I hope it made sense.